And tonight on the Daily Wrap, Hillary Clinton in the White House now calling for stricter gun control legislation in the wake of last week's shooting on a college campus in Oregon. But is it all just politics? Vice President Joe Biden accused of leaking his son's last wishes for him to be president to the press. We have our reaction, his reaction. And Donald Trump, dipping slightly in the polls, says he ain't going anywhere for a long time. This is the Daily Wrap, live from New York City. And welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, along with my co-host Rick Unger, who will be heading off to the left coast, I understand.
I'm out with my fellow liberals on the left coast for a couple of days.
Really?
It's going to be great. I'm doing this event called Politicon, where you've got great people from entertainment and the political world all coming together, and it should be really awesome.
It's an insane event in terms of the people they have coming together.
I know.
Right?
I mean, between top comics, top political comics, and silly people like me who just talk out of my you-know-what for a living, we should have a heck of a good time. And October 9th and 10th, folks. If you're in L.A. or don't mind flying out there, I think you'll have a great time.
And Coulter will be,
we'll be there.
Mr. Rick's beer pong partner, so that will be very interesting.
It won't be the first time.
No, it won't be the first time, that's true. To his right, she is a U.S. Navy Reserve officer, the national co-chair of Maverick PAC, and an emerging markets banker. Morgan, pronounce your last name for me correctly. Ortegas is here for the first time. You know, they always say measure twice, cut once, so now we've
Is that what they always say?
That's what contractor school they told me that. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I see.
And finally, he's a commentator and media consultant, the former editor and publishing manager at The Blaze, and a former investment banker. He's got cash. Ben Weingarten is on his maiden voyage here as well. Two newbies tonight. May God have mercy on your souls. Let's get right to the Daily Download.
I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again during my tenure as president to offer my condolences to families in these circumstances. But based on my experience as president, I can't guarantee that. And that's terrible to say. And it can change.
Now, the White House put out that clip calling for less gun violence, hoping it would go viral since the college shooting in Oregon last week. The White House and other Democrats have done all they can to politicize stricter gun control. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton earlier this week took the opportunity to say if elected president, she would take on the NRA.
We have to close the loopholes. You know, we've got what's called the gun show loophole, and we've got what's now being called the Charleston loophole. We also must address the very serious problem of military-style weapons on our streets. We have got to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them. Ideally, what I would love to see is gun owners, responsible gun owners, hunters, form a different organization and take back the Second Amendment from these extremists.
Good to see she's no longer wearing orange. That was never a good look. Anyway, Clinton has threatened executive action if she becomes president to restrict gun sales. So has the White House.
So the president has frequently pushed his team to consider a range of executive actions that could more effectively keep guns out of the hands of criminals and others who shouldn't have access to them.
So firearm advocates are fighting back, including our next guest. Alan Gottlieb is the chairman of the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms and founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. Alan also authored many books on the topic and is editor of gunmag.com. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So the left and some in the middle are saying that we have a major problem with guns in the wake of the recent mass shootings. Do we?
Well, anytime there's a tragedy, none of us are happy about it, and we'd like to do something about it. But what these people want to do is basically take away our Second Amendment rights. Hillary Clinton was just recently filmed at a fundraiser saying that the individual right to keep and bear arms that the Supreme Court has upheld should be changed and taken away, and if she's president, she'll appoint judges that will rip up and shred the Second Amendment. Barack Obama says he's for common sense gun control, and then points to countries like the United Kingdom and Australia and says we should have laws like theirs, where they banned guns and confiscated guns. That's not common sense to me. Likewise, Hillary Clinton talks about we need gun safety laws. Well, she knows nothing about gun safety, and none of these are gun safety laws. They're just using terminology to try and change and alter the debate and change the narrative away from what they really want, which is gun bans and gun confiscation.
Alan, it's Rick Unger. You know, once again, here we are following a mass shooting at a college, and we seem to be having the same old conversation. I'm certainly prepared to acknowledge that we're not going to see much of a change in gun laws, and even if we did, there would still be 300 million guns on the street. So I think it ends up being kind of a wasted conversation. At the same time, while I'm sympathetic to those who argue for more mental health, because that can't be a bad thing, I wonder if you have any ideas to share where we could take on this problem of mass killings without affecting the interest that you have in guns, without affecting any mental health we do have, except for making it better. Give me an original new idea to deal with this problem.
Well, I wish I had a real answer to solve this problem of mass shootings or anybody using, firearms and committing violent acts. But it's rather difficult, and it's rather expensive to come up with solutions, and Congress and legislators don't want to spend the money. They'd rather just pass a new law, thinking that, somehow, even though we have 22,500 laws that regulate the private ownership, use, and possession of firearms, somehow one more law is going to do the trick.
But again, you're back to the guns, Alan. I agree with you. I don't really, but I'm going to for the sake of this discussion. Let's look at what else we can do to stop these mass shootings. The problem is you and I get into this conversation, as everybody does, never changes. We have the same conversation over and over and over again. Why aren't we putting, I'll tell you what, I'll bet you the NRA would be willing to contribute to a fund with the government to solve this problem without having to go after your gun rights. So why aren't we doing that?
We all would. The problem is, what do we do? And none of us really know. Like, let's look at the case we just had in Oregon. Here's somebody who's obviously mentally ill, but either wasn't getting treatment or wasn't any database to begin with, so there's no way you can know that he had the firearms or take them away from him. So how do you address that problem without taking away everybody else's rights? That's the problem. So we need to spend more time, obviously, on mental health and figuring out how to do this. But I haven't seen one solution out of the White House or out of Hillary Clinton that would really do it. Background checks aren't going to work. This person went through background checks and passed them. So did most of the other shooters in recent history. What are you going to put in, a waiting period? That wouldn't work because he had the guns for a long period of time before he did anything. So, I mean, if somebody came up with a real answer here, we'd be more than happy to talk about it. But all they want to do is give us solutions that don't solve the problem and take away our rights. That's a problem for us.
Well, Alan Gottlieb, we're low on time, but thanks for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, so you mumbled there during saying he's going back to the guns.
Problem. He doesn't have anything else to offer. And by the way, I agree with Alan. The White House doesn't, Hillary Clinton doesn't, and neither do the Republicans who are leadership. They don't, because all we ever do is have the same conversation
Can I stop you there?
and over again.
Hillary Clinton is asking that, at least at gun shows, that
She's
we have
doing
private.
the same thing that they're doing.
You don't think that's
Oh,
possible?
no, I'm all for it. I mean, this is what I said to Alan. It's not that I wouldn't like to see some greater gun regulation, but I recognize it doesn't stop these mass killings. So let's quit playing this game of talking about it. Let's actually get people to focus on a real solution. He didn't have one because he's never been asked to think about one. It's not easy, but wouldn't we be better off trying to come up with something?
Ben?
Well, it's tough to regulate away behaviors, and I think what we see here is that any move the government makes is going to have unintended or sometimes.
What if it's technology?
Well, there are some proposals on technology, like having locks on guns. There are fingerprint locks and things of that nature. But the real problem is that legal gun owners are not the issue here. It's people who obtain guns illegally.
I agree.
And the real problem is that the places where there are the highest regulatory standards when it comes to being able to own a firearm are the places where there's the most gun violence. And so, we've seen the violence rate fall from 1993 through today, through incarceration, and also through.
Well, but you're right, but we haven't solved this mass murdering problem. You're absolutely right. Less gun deaths today than in a very long
49%
time.
since 1990.
But we're not seeing a solution to this problem, and we never had the conversation on how to do it.
And with the president and with Hillary Clinton threatening executive action, we're never going to come to a solution. I mean, this president has a history of threatening executive action with the Iran deal, whatever it is.
Yeah, we will have to leave it there, but that's exactly right, though. When you start saying already, before you even get a nomination, that you're going to go with executive action, that doesn't show much compromise now, does it? Anyway, coming up next, did Vice President Joe Biden leak his son's last wish for him to be president to the press? That's next.
I don't think any man or woman should run for president unless, number one, they know exactly why they would want to be president, and two, they can look at the folks out there and say, I promise you, you have my whole heart, my whole soul, my energy, and my passion to do this. And I'd be lying if I said that I knew I was there.
That, of course, was Joe Biden appearing on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert last month and discussing whether he has the heart to run for president of the United States. But was Biden more interested in a presidential bid than he was letting on? You'll recall that the vice president experienced a surge in popularity back in August when Maureen Dowd reported in her New York Times column that Joe Biden's dying son, Beau, had one last request for his dad. She wrote, Beau was losing his nouns and the right side of his face was partially paralyzed, but he had a mission. He tried to make his father promise to run, arguing that the White House should not revert to the Clintons and that the country would be better off with Biden values. Now, since August, most polls have shown increasing support for a Biden run for his party's nomination. But now, the political magazine Politico is reporting that it was the vice president himself who leaked the story of his son's dying wish that his dad run for president. It seems that the vice president may have been floating his own trial balloon to the public to see if there would be sufficient interest in a Biden campaign. So far, that answer appears to be a resounding yes. So, was the vice president acting in a somewhat calculating manner when he told Mrs. Dowd of his son's wishes? Or was emotion really controlling the day, Joe?
I question this story very highly.
The Politico story.
Absolutely, the Politico story, because it comes as usual from the unnamed sources, right. And I use unnamed sources, and I totally get it. But to think that somebody would actually use their son's death, somebody has, look, you can like Joe Biden. I think what he said yesterday was deplorable about all Republican nominees being homophobic. I think that's way over the line, right? And it's not. It shouldn't be in this this campaign. However, to think that he would go so far to say, you know what, boy, my son's death, I really can get popular off of something like this and draw sympathy to myself. I can't get there that a human being would actually do that.
It's an interesting point. Morgan, I've been surprised today. A number of people who would be natural opponents of Joe Biden have said pretty much what Joe just said. They really are not prepared to lay this on him. What do you think?
I think that, you know, Joe Biden over the course of his long political career has said some really crazy things, but I think generally he's a pretty well-liked guy. Yes. I think, you know, what he said yesterday being case in point. And so, you know, it's interesting that these unnamed sources were named. I have a feeling that they are somehow associated with the Clinton campaign.
You do get that feeling, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a nasty story.
You agree with that, Ben? You're shaking your head, yes.
Well, I think it's possible, and also note that this was basically Barack Obama's newspaper, the New York Times, where this was printed, and I don't think there's any great coincidence that that's the case.
Interesting. Right. So do you think the negative spin that's surely going to be put on this story by Biden's opponents, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, is this going to cause him to lose any support as it goes forward, or has he already lost support as a result of today's story? Start with Ben.
I don't think it really hurts him, honestly. He can always frame it as, look, this was a reporter who framed a story the way she wanted to frame it, and, you know, we shouldn't be politicizing this issue.
Right.
You're all agreeing too much. What the heck is this?
Well, I think that we're all just so used to the crassness of the Clinton, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and the people associated with them, that it's somewhat not surprising to see these attack articles leaked, especially in Politico.
Rick, yeah, the timing here is very, very interesting.
And it's really interesting what I'm hearing all of you say, and I've heard this throughout the day today. There's a confluence of situations here. One, I think nobody really believes that that's who Joe Biden is. Right. And good for him. You know, whether you like him politically or not, I think everybody agrees he's a very decent man. Couple that with the feeling that there's Clinton all over this. And I think that, Ben, what you said is right. This is not going to hurt him. And in fact, when the stories start to come out, as I suspect they might, that there are Clinton fingerprints on this, won't it help him, Joe?
Rick, the Clinton camp is scared to death of a Joe Biden candidacy. They're not so much scared of Bernie, because the way they see it, maybe we lose Iowa, we'll definitely lose New Hampshire, South Carolina is our wall, once we go down south we're fine. Joe Biden, that all changes, because he can get the African-American vote the way Bernie Sanders cannot. Any support that you see dropping from Hillary Clinton, it comes from Joe Biden running.
Right.
He doesn't draw from Sanders. He draws from Clinton.
Interesting. I'm curious what you have to say about this. We all know that candidates are really popular until they decide to become candidates.
Exactly.
And then everything starts to change. Now, I think Joe's right. Right now, it's all going to, if it's coming from Hillary, it's probably going more to Biden than it is to Bernie. What happens if Joe Biden announces a race?
I think he's going to need to announce pretty soon, because I do think...
You think he's going to, by the way?
No, I don't think he's going to.
No.
I think that he is really grieving and loves the public adoration that he's getting right now. But I think where the American people are, who are the people that are highest in the polls? The people who are aggressive, right? The people who are tough, the people who are strong-minded. And I don't think that, it's fine to sort of play with the presidency, but after a while, people sort of say, okay, make up your mind. We want someone who wants this, who wants to fight for us. That's who's leading in the polls right now. And Joe Biden, I think, he only has a few more weeks of dithering on this.
How much will it affect, Ben, his decision? Today we're hearing stories that people close to the Clintons are suggesting that Hillary bail out on New Hampshire, that she quit spending a lot of money up there, quit spending time on there, and just write it off. That's got to have an impact on Joe.
Well, look, there's been the perfect confluence of events, and as Hillary continues to get dragged through the mud, it only makes Biden look more and more attractive. And I don't think that the Benghazi hearing and what comes after that are going to help Hillary very much either.
Well, I would have agreed with that last week. I think at this point, the Benghazi hearing has turned into no harm, no foul, no nothing, except an opportunity for Hillary to remind them on every answer that they're only there to come after Hillary.
It's never good to combine McCarthy and hearings, ever.
Yeah, never good. All right, so do you think Joe Biden leaked his son's dying wishes to the press? If you do or if you don't, go to newsmaxtv.com/comments and let us know. Coming up, critics are blasting a California university professor for having created a multi-million-dollar race base.
And hello again. University of California, Berkeley is coming under fire for its plans to create a $20 million scholarship funded by private nonprofits to A, increase African-American student applicants, B, the hiring of race-specific clinical psychologists, and C, the diversification of UC Berkeley's faculty and upper management. Chancellor Nicholas Dirks told the Berkeley News, and we quote, "For too long, African-Americans on our campus have faced obstacles to feeling fully included in the life of our university." The move comes after Berkeley's Black Student Union made a list of demands to the college administration that include the creation of an African-American Resource Center, hiring of admissions staff and recruitment strategies to increase the number of black students at UC Berkeley, the hiring of 2 black psychologists, and the hiring of more black faculty. This is all well and good, but it also appears that it might be illegal. California approved Proposition 209 nearly 20 years ago that bars state institutions from considering race, sex, or ethnicity for public employment, contracting, of course, he said. Rick, you're pre-law or pre-med. What's the difference, really? No, you're a lawyer. You have a degree. In your estimation, is this illegal?
There's so much about this that's interesting. For starters, I feel like I'm back in college. It was precisely what used to get asked for back in the 60s when I was in college. The fact that it's Berkeley makes me laugh. I mean, if there's a more progressive school, I don't quite know what it is. Look, it may be illegal. What's fascinating about this is Proposition 209 was actually originally written to keep schools from considering somebody's blackness, to keep them out of the school. Now it's being used to consider somebody's whiteness. For somebody like me, this is a case that's going to be nothing short of awesome. Do I think it's illegal? Yeah, it probably is. What may get it off the hook is that it's being done by a private fund.
Right.
It's not using taxpayer or state money.
But it's a school that takes public money.
Yes.
So that's probably the illegal part.
Probably. It's going to be, I could argue this very easily both ways as a good case.
Well, listen, I'm all for diversity inclusion in the workforce, but when I read this, I thought the school's supposed to be quite progressive. What about Hispanic students? What about Asian American students? What about Muslim American? I mean, you could go down the list, and it's sort of like, why are you singling out one ethnic group? If I were another ethnic group in California that was not represented in Berkeley, why do I not get special attention?
Well, because remember, it's not the school; it's a private group doing it. So that those other ethnics want to start their own. So if it's legal, they can.
But it's the school that's starting the fund. They're just going to private nonprofits to raising the money, but it's an initiative from within the school.
It would have probably been smarter. That's a very good point. It would have been smarter if a private organization had started this and then donated the money to the school.
You know, we were talking about, different networks that we go on as guests from time to time during the break. And CNN had me on one time because Saturday Night Live decided to have its first female black cast member for the first time in like 6 years or something like that. And the first question I asked was, well, why doesn't anybody ever talk about the fact there are no, and never has been, an Asian cast member ever on the show? Why does it always come down to black and white? And we forget about all the other ethnic groups that are out there. And this is exactly what's happening here again, Ben, to your point.
There actually was a major legal case recently that's been brought by Asians who feel discriminated against on the basis of merit. When you're judging someone on their race, on their skin pigmentation, on ethnicity, every other issue, as opposed to merit, there's something I think fundamentally unfair and wrong about that. And I don't always invoke Chief Justice Roberts, but in this case I will. He said something to the effect of the surest way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. I think that speaks for itself.
The optics are a little tougher in California when it comes to Asians, because if you go to UCLA campus, honestly, and I'm not being funny, it's hard to see anybody who's not Asian walking on that campus.
But going back to the merit discussion, I mean, listen, when I was getting ready to go to college, I have a twin sister. Our parents only went to high school. No one in our family had been to college. My father raised my three sisters, my mother, on like 35, 40 grand a year. I mean, this was not a lot of money. I needed scholarships, and it didn't matter what my skin color was.
That's interesting. Did you get the scholarships?
I did. Thank you to the Miss America pageant.
Really?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Which state did you take home?
I was a runner-up a couple times in Florida before I moved up to New York.
Did you beat your sister for
No, we didn't compete against
Oh,
each
that
other.
would have been awesome.
Did she also go into the pageant?
She did it a couple times. She wasn't into it as much as I was, but I got a lot of scholarship money out of it. I was Miss Florida Citrus, too.
Yeah.
Of
Oh,
course
Florida
you were.
Citrus Bowl, yes.
Of course you
Watch it
were.
every year on ESPN.
There you
That's
go.
good stuff. All right, so what are your thoughts on race-based scholarships? Go to newsmaxtv.com/comments. It's right down there. And let your voice be heard. May read that comment later in the show. Up next, we'll tell you the only reason why Donald Trump would drop out of the presidential race.
Have you given consideration? I read somewhere that you said if I fell behind badly, I'd get out. Are you thinking about when you would get out of this race?
Not even a thought. Not even 1% of a thought. I'm not going anywhere. I'm leading every poll, and I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna make our country great again. That's what I'm not getting out. I'm gonna win. Okay.
And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. You know him. I know you love him. That was, of course, Donald Trump on CNN's New Day this morning, trying his best to convince Chris Cuomo that he has no plans to drop out of the 2016 presidential race. That is, he has no plans to drop out unless he starts doing really badly in the polls, which so far he is not. Stuart Stevens, one of former presidential candidate Mitt Romney's top strategists, he thinks that day is coming. He told CNN's Jake Tapper that Trump will not be on the ballot by February 1st of next year. Of course, Donald Trump fired back on Twitter saying political strategist Stuart Stevens, who led Romney down the tubes in what should have been an easy victory, has terrible political instincts. I actually agree with him on that one. So Trump says he's in it to win it. But come on, just between us, right? How long do you think he has to stay in the race, Joe?
What if I could go back to Chris Cuomo quickly, and I've been on that show several times before. That was a patently stupid question.
Well, not really, because remember, Trump did just say a few days ago that if he really started to fall in the polls, that he would get out.
Right. Where is he now in the polls?
He hasn't fallen that much in the polls. In fact,
Well,
he
he's
really
fallen behind
hasn't.
Ben Carson.
So
yes.
In one poll,
In one poll.
in
Not
real
exactly
clear
a major collapse.
Real clear politics. He has a clear lead right now.
Right.
So the hypothetical question asked by Chris was, Donald, if you fall badly in the polls, will you drop out? Well, that's like 6 steps from now, right? So, well, yeah, of course
And
you
I don't
drop
think-
out
did
when
he-
you fall
did-
badly
did
in the
he
polls.
actually say if you fall badly? I don't know if I even
Yeah, he
heard
goes,
him
well,
say that.
he goes, you said that if you fall badly in the polls that you'll drop out. Yeah, anybody drops out when they fall badly in the polls. So what the kind of question was that? It was dumb, Ricky.
What do you think, guys?
Well, I think that, honestly, I mean, if you're one of the conservative candidates in the field and you want to attack the establishment, but you don't want to have to do it directly, you want Donald Trump to stay in the field. So Donald Trump going out and attacking Marco Rubio, for example, serves to the benefit
Wait, I got
of...
to interrupt you. If you're one of the conservatives, you want Donald Trump to stay in?
Yeah, because
Really?
he will be able to punch someone like a Marco Rubio, let's say, where a Ted Cruz couldn't. So you see how he serves to the benefit of some of the other candidates.
Of the unknowns.
Of the unknowns.
Unwanteds.
Yes, correct.
It's not going to help them. You think that Donald Trump is going to help the governor of Louisiana?
Ted Cruz certainly thinks that he's going to help him.
Actually, Ted Cruz thinks that he's going to help him. Why? Because he thinks also that Trump will be out by February 1st.
And he thinks that he's going to get those
he's going to inherit the voters.
But in the meantime, Ted Cruz doesn't want to be seen as attacking a colleague of his in the Senate, Marco Rubio. So, you keep it at arm's length.
I have to disagree with you slightly right there, because Ted Cruz has gone specifically after the leadership and after McConnell in
he attacks everybody in the Senate.
So
but he's not running against them. He is running against Rubio. And he hasn't really attacked him pointedly to date.
Yeah, his performance in the debates has been a bit underwhelming. Not from the Ted Cruz that we see on the Senate.
Well, let's look at where Trump currently stands. His staying power has become an issue, as the enormous lead he once held is now becoming increasingly smaller as some other candidates, inch closer and closer to the top. Let's look at the NBC WSJ poll. According to that poll, Trump's lead in New Hampshire is now down to 5 points after leading by as much as 22 points back in September. What's more, he holds only a 5-point edge in Iowa as well, after once holding a significantly larger share of the polls just weeks ago. And when GOP primary voters were asked for their top pick for the GOP nomination, Trump does win, but he only beats Dr. Ben Carson by just 1 point. Still in the lead, but with numbers that appear to be hardening. Meanwhile, Dr. Carson is getting much stronger support, as 69% of those polled say they would consider voting for Carson, while only 47% would consider voting for Trump. So Trump remains the GOP's top pick barely. But more people now say they'd be willing to give their vote to Ben Carson, even if he is not yet their first choice. Joe, what gives?
One is civilized and one acts like a mature human being. And one...
Which is which?
I mean, today, after Trump's interview with Chris Cuomo, not only did he go after Stevens, but he also went after Cuomo for the questions.
He did. Yes, he did.
And people see that and they say, how is he ever going to be president? Because he's going to be criticized 10 times as much. He's going to be tweeting all day from the White House. I understand that people like the fact that he's candid and that he's authentic, but he has to grow up.
Morgan, we've only got about 10 seconds. Just quickly, will Donald Trump be undone by his immaturity?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Okay, well, see,
And
nothing but agreement on this show tonight. We're all Democrats and Republicans together. Be sure to check out Steve Malzberg's one-on-one sit-down with Dr. Ben Carson tonight at 7, where they'll discuss his latest surge in the polls and if he can beat Donald Trump. That's tonight at 7 p.m. only on Newsmax TV. And we always want to know what you think. Carson and Trump locked in a battle to lead the GOP, but are either of them your candidate? Tell us your opinion by voting in our online poll. You can do it right now at newsmaxpolls.com. Coming up next, it's that time. We're going to read some of your viewer comments. Make sure you stay with us.
They're very interesting. And welcome back to The Wrap. Before the break, we talked about Donald Trump promising he will not drop out of the race unless his poll numbers are really terrible, like some of his competition. Well, our own Steve Malzberg sat down with Dr. Carson, whose poll numbers are quite good, to get his take on that. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think he actually is talking about some of the others who are in the race, who are, polling at 0% and 1%.
Sending a message?
2%. He's trying to say, guys, come on now. I think that's what he's saying.
Interesting.
But, I think that's a very noble thing for him to do.
Donald Trump has said that if he wins, he would offer you a job in his cabinet or his administration. He didn't say vice president on the ticket. How do you feel about Donald Trump? And if you were the nominee, would you consider Donald Trump as a VP? And if not, would you consider offering him a position of some sort in your administration?
Well, I think Donald Trump is a very talented individual. He certainly knows how to take advantage of situations. There's no question about that. And I believe he could bring some wisdom somewhere along the line. I think there would be room for him somewhere.
In your administration?
Absolutely.
But not on your ticket?
I think there'd be room somewhere.
Okay. Could you see yourself being the boss to Donald Trump?
Maybe as an advisor.
Wow, Donald Trump and President Carson's cabinet. I'm sure we'd accept that in a heartbeat, being number 2 to somebody. Well, if you want to see more of that incredible interview, be sure to tune into the Steve Malzberg Show tonight at 7 p.m., right after the wrap. All right, time to read some of your viewer comments. First up, we asked you if you think Vice President Joe Biden used his son for political gain. David says, quote, I felt really bad for Joe Biden when his son died of cancer, but I'm not surprised in the least bit to hear he used his son for political gain. Wow, people are willing to go there.
Well, I hope that that's not representative of a large number of people. I understand why this commenter said that. I'm not, going to chew them out for it, but I think it's complicated. I think it could be a piece of that, but also a large part of emotion. People are not simple. It's not either or.
I think this shows you why politicians are mistrusted so much, that there's such a thirst for power that people would actually think that he would exploit his son in order to leak out information and gain sympathy for himself.
Well, we also asked you to share your thoughts on race-based scholarships in schools. Trev says, seems to me what that California university is doing is flat-out racism. Why should anybody get special treatment now? I think it's time to say goodbye to affirmative action, Joe.
Janice says, African Americans still get a raw deal in this country. Racism is rampant. Just look at the Charleston shooting. There is no reason to end affirmative action or special programs for minorities. That's a fascinating perspective. You take a shooting at a church by a guy who was completely out of his mind and say, well, that's why we should give affirmative action to people in colleges everywhere. Makes sense to me.
No, that obviously no connection there, but it's interesting to see our viewers with very different point of view.
That's one way to put it. Sure.
You guys, you're not weighing in. Well, have we intimidated you? What's the deal here?
Again, I would just go back to, we're talking about historical injustices that were changed with legislation in the 60s, and now we're going back to let's discriminate to make up for past discrimination. It seems un-American.
Always been the issue, right?
Yeah.
Is it me? Finally tonight, we ask you to share your thoughts on gun control. Robert says, perhaps the President and Mrs. Clinton should remember we have a Constitution. You're not getting my guns. Well, you know what? I mean, yeah, we know. And honestly, nobody's coming for your guns. You can probably tell I'm fed up with the conversation. If we outlawed guns tonight, there'll still be 300 million guns tomorrow. Out there.
So let's talk about the political ramifications of it then. Anytime a Democrat takes on gun control, it's a losing issue for them every time.
Absolutely.
And I find that interesting because polls show that most Americans, including Republicans, by the way, including NRA members, I read a poll today that 74% of NRA members support universal background checks.
That's right.
Well, but it's interesting that you bring up the political side of it, because for Hillary Clinton, I think it is a political win, because Bernie Sanders is to the left of her on almost every single issue.
But he's been supportive of guns.
But he's been supportive of guns.
And Vermont is a very black state.
Yeah, and he actually had a very when his response came out, it was quite moderate, and it was a bit shocking when you read it, knowing what Bernie Sanders says on everything else. So he is, I think the Clinton campaign, and again, I hate to be so politically crass about it, but I think this is what they're doing. I think that they see an opening for her to be on the left, to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, it's not gonna last. I think you're absolutely right.
But in the short term, it's politically expedient for her.
Where she gets herself in trouble, though, maybe even with some Democrats, she could have gone there. But when she starts with the executive order, you're opening a can of worms that you may not need to open, right, Ben?
Yeah, I agree, and I think you're absolutely right. It was a direct shot, to use a wrong word there, at Bernie Sanders, for sure.
And I think this shows you the ramifications of President Obama using executive actions as much as he did. Now other candidates, we always said, well, what's the next president going to do? Now we already see them taking that cue.
Well, he may not be done himself, from what I hear.
Oh, no.
There may be some more coming on guns.
Of course not. Some habits are hard to break. Anyway, if you want to weigh in on any of the issues we talk about here in the show, be sure to send your comments to that little box below me, newsmaxtv.com/comments. As you can see, we even read them on the air. We keep our word. Up next, it's happy time for yay or nay. You're watching The Wrap. Hello there again. Happy Tuesday. It's time for Yay or Nay. First up, a professor from the University of Pennsylvania, that's the hard one to get into, is getting some much-deserved heat for an offensive tweet that she posted about presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson after reading a Sports Illustrated interview where Carson said he didn't mind NASCAR fans flying the Confederate flag on private property. The professor that you see there with that lovely hair says, if only there was a, let's see, how are we going to do this? Insert racist term that rhymes with tune. How's that? Beginning with the letter C of the Year Award. Okay, so you probably understand where we're going with that. Anyway, that's just a whole bowl of wrong. So this professor previously tweeted that God was a white racist after George Zimmerman was acquitted in the Trayvon Martin case. Will she lose her job, or will this be excused because a Republican was the target? I ask you, Ben.
She will not lose her job. And I appreciate the professor's candor, even though I think her message was particularly odious.
It's just the example being said. She's using racial slurs against a presidential candidate. Ben Carson never hurt anybody, and yet I agree with you. I don't think she'll be reprimanded in any capacity.
She probably won't, and she should be, because I think, you know, as a professor, she's saying to all of these students at the University of Pennsylvania that this kind of really disgusting speech is okay.
Right,
it's
Wharton
not.
School of Business.
I actually think she was. I don't think she's at the Wharton School of Business.
Yeah,
She's
I know,
at
but that's the
University.
home of the Wharton School of
But
Business.
I think she will be reprimanded. I don't think she'll be fired. I actually don't think she should be fired, and not because it was a Republican. I would say exactly the same if it was reversed. It's freedom of speech, folks, and we allow that, and we support it. Obviously, what she said was disgusting.
Right, but if you say freedom of speech, I can go, you know, if I go out and say something like heinous about the banking community and my Twitter feed, what I do for a profession, then I'm going to have, if I said something horrible about my employer, there's going to be repercussions for me.
You're right.
Having freedom of speech doesn't mean that you're not an idiot and shouldn't be fired.
I agree that she's an idiot, but she is allowed to say, I don't think she will be fired because she's working for a public university.
To that point, if a conservative professor said something about a
wouldn't
Barack Obama, I guarantee you he would be fired.
Well, I don't know that that's true. I really don't.
A hypothetical that we'll never know the answer to. Anyway, next up, an op-ed in the New York Times is suggesting that both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are doing well in their respective parties because they both have New York accents that promote the I tell it like it is personas while getting the points across in argumentative settings like debates. That's the worst New York accent ever. I'm from Jersey. I have no excuse. Anyway, let's get right to the question. Is being a loud New Yorker the key to the White House? Unger from California.
Well, it never has been in the past. Hard to imagine it will be now.
Didn't work for Al Smith, did it?
No.
Yes, Morgan.
No, I don't think that tends to translate well to middle America.
Good, no.
But does it show at least authenticity that they have the accent, they're not hiding who they are? Like Hillary is South Carolina South 1 minute.
Worked for Jimmy Carter.
It did work for
Well, I
Jimmy
think it's
Carter. And Bill Clinton.
interesting. Bernie Sanders, socialist from Brooklyn. I think it's representative of the Democratic Party that he's in the lead with that accent and all that baggage.
Very good point. Okay, next up,
No, wait, I think
whether...
that was an insult in there. I think it is representative of the Democratic Party. That's a good thing.
See, now we slipped that in there. Very good, Ben. Anyway,
Honest liberal.
Next, a weather forecaster on a Russian state-owned news network. This is tremendous. Included in her weather report that the weather in Syria on Saturday was, quote, good weather for bombing, unquote, and went on to say that it was also, second quote, ideal for carrying out operations, and that, quoting again, like cloud cover, will not make flying more difficult and will not influence the systems for aiming weapons. We don't get that here in the U.S. now, do we, from Mr. G or any of these other phonies like Storm Field? Anyway, complete with the video of airstrikes that she showed as well. Take that, Sam Champion. Saturday was the 4th day in a row that Russia bombed the hell out of Syria. Will this kind of weather forecasting catch on in the States? I ask you, Morgan, a former weather forecaster yourself.
I did want to be a weather forecaster when I was a kid.
Like you could be.
Yeah, thanks, I think. Wow, that's, you know, I mean, the situation in Syria, as someone who served in the Middle East for a long time, is so bad that I hate to even joke about it, and these people are, whoever said this is disturbed.
That's the thing. When you're doing weather forecasts, like, hey, you're going to be able to kill more people today.
What language was the weather forecast in? Was that in
Russian?
It looked Russian.
It was Russian.
Oh, yeah,
well,
sure.
then it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a Vladimir Putin approved weather report.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, it's all state-run media,
Yeah.
right? So it's just amazing the tentacles that the Soviet Union's back. I don't care what anybody says.
No, it's not.
Ivan
Their
Drago,
economy's
Sylvester
not
Stallone,
there.
and Rocky
Ivan
Four
Drago.
or 7 now at this point. It's happening. Anyway, that's all for tonight. I'm Joe Conch on behalf of Rick Unger and the rest of the Pulitzer Bureau. We thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. The Steve Malzberg Show. That's next.